So today I'm going to be talking about the fact that Jonathan Majors has been found guilty, and it seems like Marvel is actually going to be parting ways with him after all. And so I guess it's true that the Kang saga maybe is over, and honestly, maybe Doctor Doom is going to be coming in. But I just kind of wanted to take a look at this article from the New York Times here and read through it real quick. So, as you can see from the title, it says that Marvel will part ways with Jonathan Majors after guilty verdict. Mr. Majors was convicted of misdemeanor assault and harassment for attacking his girlfriend in a car. The company dropped the actor shortly after. So he was already dropped by his agency, and so now it just sounds like that Marvel has decided that they're no longer going to be moving forward with him, and that's kind of a major deal. Yeah, no pun intended. So Jonathan Majors, who is one of Hollywood's fastest rising stars before misdemeanor domestic violence charges halted his ascent, was found guilty of assault and harassment on Monday for attacking his girlfriend in a car in Manhattan. Shortly after a six-person jury in Manhattan announced the verdict, Marvel Studios parted ways with the actor, a spokeswoman for the company said. The jury acquitted Mr. Majors on 2 counts that had required prosecutors to show that he had acted with intent, one of assault and one of harassment, but jurors found Mr. Majors guilty on the 2 other charges after more than 5 hours of deliberation. And I believe that deliberation was across 3 days, so it definitely took a bit of time for them to make a decision. The verdict thwarted Mr. Majors' hopes of salvaging his career by proving his innocence in the March altercation. His future in the film industry is now clouded, and he could face just under a year in jail. His sentencing is scheduled for February 6th. So we don't actually know what his sentencing is going to be yet. That's always going to end up being up to the judge. Like, the judge is going to make the final decision on what it is, as well as based upon any other laws or regulations that the judge has to adhere to. If we think back to the case that happened between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, in that case, Johnny Depp was only allowed to receive like $250,000 or $350,000 or some ridiculously, like, it might have even been less than that. But he was only allowed to receive like a really small amount of money because of a law in the state in which the verdict was rendered. And because of that, like, he was only allowed to get so much money. Like, it capped off the amount that he was allowed to be awarded in damages and whatnot. So who knows what Jonathan Majors' actual sentencing is going to be, like whether or not it's like probation or if he's actually going to be facing jail time. I'm not entirely sure yet, but either way, it doesn't look good for him, right? Like, it doesn't look good for him. It doesn't look good for Marvel, honestly, because they really stuck through it with him. And to be fair, I can't entirely blame Marvel, right? Because obviously, the way that our legal system works, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And if that's the case, then obviously it kind of makes sense that they stuck with him until the verdict. But at that point, once it was rendered that he was guilty, you kind of just got to move on. And realistically, I think the Loki season 2 has been set up in such a way that they can move on from Kang. Like, it's not really a necessary thing to keep him up. And fan reception hasn't really been ideal for Kang, other than in the Loki series. And so, since the Loki series might be wrapped up, I really don't see why we would continue to worry about Kang at this point. And who knows, maybe that actually means that Tom Hiddleston's going to be done, because I don't know what's going to happen next for his character at this point, or even what's going to happen at all for Jonathan Majors, honestly, or what Kang's character is going to do now. But let's read on. Mr. Majors, 34, wearing a gray suit and gray suede shoes, did not visibly react to the verdict other than to squint slightly and to wrinkle his forehead. He left the courthouse without comment. The jurors found him guilty of reckless assault and harassment after a whirlwind 2-week trial in which the actor, like most defendants, did not testify. Instead, the courtroom heard from his now ex-girlfriend, Grace Jabari, 30, and detailed the altercation that left her ear bloody and finger fractured. On her first day of testimony this month, she gave jurors a full account of what had happened, speaking publicly for the first time about the episode. She said that Mr. Majors had received a flirty text from another woman, and that she had grabbed his phone out of his hand. First, she said, he tried to pry her fingers away, then he twisted her hand and her arm. Next, she said, I felt like a really hard blow across my head. Eventually, she said, Mr. Majors asked the driver to stop the vehicle. Video that jurors watched showed Mr. Majors jumping out, followed by Ms. Jabari. He turned around, picked her up, and placed her back in the car, appearing to push her back in when she tried to get out. The Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin L. Bragg, said in an email that the trial had demonstrated the psychological and emotional abuse that is far too common in domestic violence cases. He thanked the jury for its service and Ms. Jabari for bravely telling her story despite having to relive her trauma on the stand. So obviously, not a good look for Jonathan Majors. I think that there was possibly a charge against him at some point for false imprisonment, and that does seem to kind of line up with the way that she was describing, like, being held against her will within the car. I don't know if that necessarily actually qualifies as false imprisonment. I mean, I guess he didn't get charged with that, so probably not. What is interesting, though, is the fact that at this point, I don't know if he's going to get a whole lot of work left in Hollywood. And this is really not a good look for him. And in some cases, it's one of those things where it's like, obviously, I don't think it was right for her to have taken the phone out of his hand, but I don't necessarily think that everything he did afterward was really required, right? Like, if it wasn't that big of a deal, he probably could have just explained to her that, like, oh, hey, this chick sent me a flirty message. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it. You know, baby, I'm only here for you. But obviously, that seems to not be what happened. And I think that everyone believed what she said. And based on everything else, it does seem like there's video evidence that demonstrates that Majors was keeping her kind of held against her will in the car. And that's not a good look. So I can kind of understand how the jury ended up coming to the decision that they came to. So let's read on. Mr. Major's lawyers had argued that it was Ms. Jabari who had assaulted their client, and they unleashed a fusillade, I have no idea what that word is, of attacks. I assume it means like multitude of attacks on her before and during the trial, casting her as a liar who sought revenge on Mr. Majors after he strayed. They asked jurors to focus on Ms. Jabari's actions after her altercation with the actor. She had run into 3 strangers who attempted to console her, and then had gone out clubbing with them, returning home hours later. But prosecutors urged jurors to remain focused on what had happened in and directly outside the car, and Mr. Major's arguments appeared to fall flat. A judge prevented the actor's lawyers from detailing evidence that convinced at least one police detective that there was probable cause to arrest Ms. Jabari in October, months after the incident. A lawyer from Mr. Majors, Priya Chaudhry, I'm not sure about that one, was defiant in a statement, arguing that jurors had not believed Ms. Jabari's story because they found out that Mr. Majors did not intentionally cause any injuries to her. We are disappointed, however, that despite not believing Ms. Jabari, the jury nevertheless found that Mr. Majors was somehow reckless. She said again, accusing Ms. Jabari of attacking him. She added that Mr. Majors still has faith in the process and looks forward to fully clearing his name. We are disappointed, however, that despite not believing Ms. Jabari, the jury nevertheless found that Mr. Majors was somehow reckless, she said, again accusing Ms. Jabari of attacking him. She added that Mr. Majors still has faith in the process and looks forward to fully clearing his name. So, I can kind of see where the lawyer is coming from. I don't know if necessarily being super, super angry and aggressive about it necessarily is the right approach from the sound of it, but I can understand where they're coming from because essentially she is claiming that, which I'm just like, I never understand when lawyers do this. It's like, you understand the law, right? Like, it's like, oh, but nevertheless, they somehow found him this way. It's like, you probably understand how that works. And it's just ridiculous when lawyers act that way, in my opinion. But what's interesting about this is that I can see where they're coming from because they're essentially saying, like, okay, if there was no intent to hurt her, then he shouldn't be charged. But it's one of those things where it's like, yes, but even when there isn't intent to hurt someone, people still get charged with things all the time. Just because there was no intent does not mean you still did not do something that you should not have done, right? Or that it did not at least produce an outcome that was not positive. So, I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily think that he should even try to appeal it. I don't know if that's going to be a good look. I mean, if he continues to appeal it, it at least makes him look like, oh, I don't think I did anything wrong. But at the same time, if there is video evidence, like kind of demonstrating that he was probably in the wrong here, it might just be better to own up with it and accept whatever sentence he's going to get. In a statement, a lawyer for Ms. Jabari, Brittany Henderson, said that the verdict has shown that no abuser, no matter how powerful they may seem, is above the law. And it's like, you know what? That's fair. If it was also a regular thing, then that especially makes it worse, right? Like, I don't know if, like, there was, like, a history of abuse there or not. I know that a couple women came forward and said there was a history of abuse with him. I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? Like, none of that. I don't know if any of that was really brought up on this trial. Usually the scope of a trial is pretty narrow. And so I doubt that was even really much of a factor. Ms. Jabari hopes that her actions will inspire other survivors to speak out and seek justice, she said. It was an unusual proceeding. Few defendants charged with the crimes that Mr. Majors was facing choose to go to trial. Most plead guilty to lesser offenses instead. But the actor had held out hope that his name would be cleared so that he could revitalize his career. And that might have been a mistake, right? Like, essentially, the fact that he thought that he could revitalize his career by going to trial might have been a mistake. Like, honestly, maybe he should have just taken the L on this one in the background of everything, and maybe it wouldn't have been as major in the news, right? Like, as major in the news, haha. Mr. Majors first gained attention in 2019, blah, blah. Okay, so this is essentially just all about the stuff that he's been in. A Star Vehicle magazine dreams about a troubled, aspiring bodybuilder was acquired by Searchlight Pictures, a Disney subsidiary, at this year's Sundance Film Festival. It was originally scheduled to be released this fall and was widely considered an Oscar contender. But the studio removed it from its calendar in October amid the actor's legal troubles. The company declined to comment on the verdict. Okay, so this right here is just more about like how he was dropped from another movie, and they haven't really, well, not necessarily dropped, but like they removed a movie that he was supposed to be in from its calendar, and they haven't actually commented yet. So I don't know. They haven't commented on the verdict yet, but I'm sure they'll chime in at some point. And then this is the big one, right? Marvel Studios had intended to build several films around the villainous character he played in Quantumania, and had been waiting for the outcome of the criminal case before deciding whether to continue. Mr. Majors was scheduled to lead Avengers the Kang Dynasty, which had been scheduled for 2026. So yeah, that's a big deal, right? Like, what's going to happen with that now? The studio will now move forward with the movie without Mr. Majors. And I don't know how that's going to work. Like, does that mean that it's still going to be the Kang Dynasty? Or are they going to, like, are they actually going to recast him? Because I just don't know if that's going to go well. And honestly, at this point, I think everyone's going to think of Kang as Jonathan Majors. So unless you move on to another villain, I don't know if it's going to be a good move. But Angela Shaw is this company's spokeswoman. She's the one that announced that, and it recently so Marvel recently hired the screenwriter Michael Waldron to work on a new script. Okay, so they are already reworking it. And then even before the verdict, the trial had damaged Mr. Majors. The courtroom heard a recording that Ms. Jabari said she made in which Mr. Majors directed her to treat him the way that Michelle Obama and Coretta Scott King had treated their husbands. Jurors saw a text exchange in which Mr. Majors urged Ms. Jabari not to seek treatment for a head wound and threatened self-deletion. So that's not a good look, right? That's a pretty manipulative move. That's kind of textbook manipulation, and the prosecutors Kelly Galloway and Michael Perez used that evidence to argue that Mr. Majors had been controlling and a manipulative boyfriend, and that the attack in the SUV in March was the culmination of a lengthy period of abuse. Ms. Galloway, in her closing argument last week, urged the jury to believe Ms. Jabari, asking jurors what she stood to gain as she lived through assaults on her character. She would not be able to fabricate this story, Ms. Galloway said. And I mean, there's definitely truth to that to a degree, right? Like, it's definitely, there's not like a whole lot that will come of this. Like, if it's a criminal case, then she doesn't really stand to necessarily gain any money from it, other than, like, I don't know, unless people want to try to send her money or something. But it's not a civil case, like, right? She's not seeking damages, so essentially we just got to wait to see what he's going to get charged with and what kind of sentence he's going to face. But I'm kind of interested to see if we could read some of the comments down here. So, alas, another superhero is neither hero nor super, but simply flawed, just like the rest of us super fans. Like that one. Ruben. All right, critical thinker. A good actor relegated to lesser or no acting roles is a cautionary tale for young men. No one wants to be around a man who can't control his anger, and no one deserves to be. I speak from painful experience. If you can't control your anger, get help. I mean, that's pretty good advice. I completely agree. I mean, it definitely does seem like maybe he does have some anger issues. From the sounds of it over here, it sounds like they're saying that he may have been kind of manipulative and abusive to a degree before this all happened, and then it was just finally like, it was almost like a snapping point, a boiling point, in which it finally happened and it got more physical than it probably ever should have. Let's see what David from Pittsburgh has to say. I'll never understand why someone who is a star, or on their way to being one, who should their choice of folks to date allow themselves to do stupid stuff over someone? Why move on? That made no sense to me. I'm completely moving on from that one. His girlfriend was no picnic, but the video was obvious, not surprised with the verdict. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like, even if she wasn't amazing, it doesn't necessarily seem like she was abusive or physically abusive or manipulative by any means. So in that regard, really, it only ends up falling on him, right, for having done what he did. So I wonder what this is about. That's a long one. Max B from California. 25 minutes ago. Wow, recent. He made a mistake, so did Will Smith. I like how he only capitalized Smith. Both these guys are terrific actors. They worked hard to be accomplished actors. I personally made a decision to go to any of their new movies if they look interesting good. We all make mistakes. I made plenty and turned out okay. You learn, let them learn. Now, if a second time happens, I would have to reconsider, not saying no or yes, but you can't destroy someone on cases action like these. So I think that there's truth. I mean, it's a little hard to read in a way, but I think that there's truth in the fact, like what I was saying earlier, where it's like, hey, not a good look. He probably should have just taken the L on this one. But at this point too, I know that there's like at least like 2 or 3 other women that have come forward that said that like they've had similar experiences. So if those ever end up going to trial, or even if they don't end up going to trial, it always ends up being a bad look if other women from his past end up coming forward and saying those things. And so if there's any truth to that, then he really just might be ruined, right? Like that might be the end. This guy says, I am a senior white male, married 46 years with a family. I say, give them a break. Let's all stop and think for a moment. Did they do something so severe as to destroy them completely? They did not. Come on, people. We can choose to be fair to them, to all. Yeah, okay. What does James Ellis think? This action is needed to show everyone should be treated equally. He needs the work at redeeming himself. Life is free of obligations. I think he meant to say isn't free of obligations, and I agree 100%. Life is not free of obligations. I think that, to be fair, it's like if he's guilty, he should be treated just the same as anyone else. It doesn't matter how much any of us super fans or nerds care about Marvel. If he really did these things, then this is the just verdict. Unfortunately, the scales of justice slide in favor of the very privileged. If you are a proven talent that fills seats, brings in enough cash, be it in films or on the playing field, you will be given enough money to settle out of court and continue to make money for your studio/team. Mr. Majors hadn't gotten to that level yet, and there are thousands willing and able to take his place. Do I like this? No, but it has happened for 100 years. There are 2 sets of justice, one for those with deep pockets and another for those without. I mean, it's true that if you have deep pockets, it can facilitate you essentially being able to do more court cases, more appeals, things like that, right? Like you're able to essentially go through the legal system and stay in the legal system for longer, right? Like if you have a lot of money, then obviously that helps out a lot. But I don't think it necessarily means that like you always just get out of something. Like in this case, clearly the dude has money, right? Like he was getting paid a lot of money for his roles in the recent movies and his TV appearances, like on Disney Plus, and so clearly the dude had deep pockets. I just don't think that he was probably innocent. Yeah, this is bad for Jonathan Majors, but it's not a huge loss for Marvel fans. While Majors was pretty good in Devotion and Creed 3, his Kang the Conqueror role wasn't well cast or even well conceived. The MCU will easily survive without him. And you know what? I don't know if I agree with all that, but I definitely think that it's probably going to be okay without him. I think that we're going to be able to move on without him, especially, like I said, I think that the ending of Loki Season 2 really sets up the fact that Kang is really not the ultimate big bad in some ways, right? Like, he has been more relegated to a multiversal threat, and it almost seems like it's a threat that they can kind of toss to the side, and realistically, too, Marvel's retconned things before in the past. I mean, Rhodey hasn't been the same actor for over a decade. But who goes clubbing for hours after their finger has been fractured? Was this injury in her bloody ear documented at the time? Did she receive medical treatment? If not, how do we know when these injuries occurred or if they occurred? Yes, believe women, and I know her name has been dragged through the mud during the trial. So people say, what incentive does she have to bring false or exaggerated charges? But if the videos showing her chasing and hitting Majors are accurate, then she is also guilty of abuse. And if she was able to go clubbing for hours after this assault, then how injurious or traumatizing was it? Is it really enough to put someone in jail for a year, let alone ruin his career? Well, first of all, I don't think that it's even guaranteed that he's going to be like in jail for a year. I don't know if that's accurate because he hasn't been sentenced yet. And I don't know about videos showing her hitting him, but if that's true, then obviously that is something that probably should have been presented. What I will say though is I don't know the situation entirely, but I will also say that adrenaline is very strong, and I would not be that surprised if there was enough adrenaline coursing through her veins that she wanted to go out and have some fun. And if I'm being honest too, that sounds like it probably was a pretty traumatic experience. And in that instance, you probably would want to try to go have some fun or do something like that. And I don't know, people cope with things in different ways. And for sure, going clubbing is not what I would do. But I'm also someone who doesn't go clubbing ever to begin with. So I don't think that I'm a great example of like, oh, I wouldn't do that, of course. But I don't think that that's necessarily 100% enough to be like, oh, well, clearly she was abusing him as well. But I didn't watch enough of the trial or know enough about the trial. Someone responded. It looks like they started fighting over it. Duchess of NYC. So it looks like Tony says, Major's attorneys had an opportunity to pose these questions in the evidence at the trial. I'll assume Majors can afford competent lawyers and that they had access to the information you gave, and the jury still returned a guilty verdict. So what point are you actually trying to make? Yeah, it's a fair point. Did you read all of his texts? He's a textbook abuser and a borderline sociopath. She's probably abusive too. Toxic people are attracted to each other and the drama. To be fair, that is actually accurate. It's actually pretty common for people to abuse each other, and so it's also not, it's not a guarantee that she didn't abuse him, but I think that it's definitely possibly true that the jury decided that his abuse was greater than her abuse, and she is the one that ultimately, does have, like, was seemingly held in a car, and that doesn't look great when, he is someone who is much larger and stronger than her. And then this person says, yes, it is enough, easily enough, a controlling brute who's found guilty of assault by a jury of his peers doesn't have some inherent right to be a famous actor. Let him get a real job after he serves his time. He'll survive, and maybe he'll stop assaulting women. Not much chance of that. Wow, okay. I mean, I don't know about that. Like, who knows? Maybe the dude can change. I don't know about that entirely. It depends on, like, the circumstances surrounding it still. Like, why would he be doing it? Why is he maybe manipulative or abusive? Like, you always got to get to the core of things. But I don't know. Definitely isn't a good look. I mean, I don't really have any, like, I wasn't, like, in love with the guy. I think he's a great actor. Like, I mean, regardless of all this, obviously the dude's a great actor. Dude knows how to act. But it also seems like he might not be a great person in his personal life. And you know what? Like it says here, honestly, who knows? Maybe they will ditch the multiverse now, but at the same time, they could also just end up bringing in Doctor Doom because he's the one that was originally a major part of the Secret Wars and all that. And so, why wouldn't they just transition, pivot to Doctor Doom? That's what I say. Doctor Doom, go all the way. But yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to read through any more comments. Obviously, I could sit here for a while and read through these. I like how people are going through here and replying to people. There's like this dude, Patrick Moore. Patrick Moore is really on top of it. He's probably looking for the people that are like, oh my gosh, I hate this verdict. And you know what? If he wants to appeal it, then we're going to see if his appeal gets approved and whatnot. And until then, I think that it's probably fair to say that Kang might just be a done deal in the MCU. And that's really all I got for you right now. Peace out.